of our 6 categories. And so we sent you out to get some food, and now you have full bellies and you're sleepy. And so perfect time to turn it over to Michael for category number 6,
Who is also sleepy.
who's also sleepy.
Yeah. My name's Michael Fitzgerald. I've met more of you now than I did on Monday, I guess. But so I've got background in both astronomy and education, and for fractions of time, it's been full-time astronomy education. So I had the liberty of being able to do a lot of actual astronomy education research, having not had a full teaching load, which expands to take all of your research space whenever you have one. And I just realized talking to Debbie this morning, who will introduce herself soon, that there are some things from an upcoming article to put astronomy education research in context. So I'm going to just mention that stuff quickly and then get into the first question. But before I do, I want to get the panelists to introduce themselves.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Debbie French, and I'm an associate professor of science education down the road at Wake Forest University.
My name is Colin Wallace, and I'm also associate professor, but right here at UNC Chapel Hill.
I thought we were going to do longer introductions. And so I have come prepared for a longer one. I'm retired. David McKinnon. I was a professor of science education at the university in Perth called Edith Cowan, and they had me as an adjunct professor while I finished supervising a bunch of PhD students doing science education research. So one of my products is him. Mikhail. Another product is joining us, well, a soon-to-be product, and she is there. That person is Tiffany. So she is just accepting a PhD scholarship funded by him, and that is Wayne Rossing. So it's a fairly tight group that I have been involved with over 30 years of research in science education and specifically astronomy education. My current role, in a sense, is the educational head banger in the Opus and MWU projects, where I'm the head data monkey, teaching the younger members like Rachel Freed how to do it. Because my prime research area is numbers, big numbers, and we're dealing with tens of thousands of students in this project. And handling those data sets requires more than an aging brain. So that's me.
Great. Okay, so just before, I don't want to take much time from the discussions. I'm just going to briefly give you an overview, and these pictures are on Discord. So I'm just going to blast through them, and if you want to have a look, go have a look. But basically, as a field, we grew up in the 1990s and had a big growth spurt in the 2000s and 2010s, and we've been pretty stable for the last little while. And it's been USA dominated up until the last few years. Oh, sorry. Okay. Too tired from lunch. Take my time. Okay, so we did a review of all the AER literature over the last... Okay, AER literature. Yeah, until 1898 is the earliest date there. And there's 2,000 articles, and most of them are journal articles. The second one is conference items, and then it's a collection of books, book chapters, and theses. And we can kind of, when the paper comes out, it's a lot of categorizations, but the interesting things were, from my perspective, is it's basically USA dominated for most of the history until the last couple of years. And the top left is in the USA, how much is AstroEdu 101 versus school-based research? And internationally, how much is school versus Astro 101? So you can see there's quite a distinct difference in the USA compared to schools. K-12, yeah. And most of our target groups of the research are students, to a lesser extent, teachers, but predominantly students. We predominantly focus on celestial motion, Earth, and robotic telescopes have arrived, and you can see it as a climbing and instrumentation techniques, but most of it is planetary sciences, Earth, celestial motion, and a bit of stars. USA, of course, by a long shot, has the most articles overall. This is just to show you, we've cut it up into constructs, like what's the paper about. Most of it is about cognitive science or content knowledge. There's only one bar that's really related to engagement or attitudes, and they're all kind of clumped together in that pink bar in the center. And over time, since the birth of the field, we started off quite quantitative, and we've started developing towards a mixed methods approach, which uses both numerical and interview, other types of research data together to paint a richer picture. So those figures are on the Discord if you want to have a look more deeply, just to put everything in context. And I know that most of us in this room are astronomers or teachers of astronomy, and there's only, say 5 to 10% of us that have a formal kind of postgraduate background in education. So when we look at these questions, I was thinking you could pick what perspective that you want to look at it from. Because I can look at it from an astronomy education researcher, but you could see it from, as a teacher, what astronomy education research would I like to see? Something like that. Or, what is important to me about that we need to know as a field of these topics. So you can kind of think about what perspective you might want to take about these questions. Does that make sense? So I think now would be a good time to jump into our discussion groups. Yes. We go after. Yeah, after everyone's had the group discussions.
Michael.
Yeah.
How are you defining cognitive processes?
It's written in the paper, and kind of it just goes, but it's like spatial thinking, stuff like that.
Spatial thinking.
Yeah, that's the big one.
One of them?
Yep. That would be the main one. Yeah.
Good. Is that simplify it? But we need to separate them, though. Put a gun to your head. You got to separate them. So remember, he wants blood on the floor.
Yeah, you're going to get it here.
Yeah.
So cognitive processes, are you clear on what that is? Yep.
So, in other words, what's more important? Being good at astronomy or your attitudes toward astronomy?
Well,
I'm
it's
assuming this
not-
is
it's not
reflecting
that.
toward the student.
It's all in the stuff the research was mentioning in spatial relations, for example. Thinking about the structure of the solar
Okay.
system, distance.
Not the cognitive. Well, okay. I was thinking about cognitive
How do
abilities.
kids think about
Okay.
distance?
Oh, okay.
So Phil Brewer, he, an American researcher, got really intrigued by how kids think about this. It's content representation to make it more accessible for them.
Okay.
So that was a big research area.
The,
90s.
okay. All right. All right. Very good attitudes. Okay.
Like us with a left.
We're trying to figure out which audience to answer this for. It seems like it's looking for an Astro 101 answer, and I'm wondering if we should just be cantankerous and answer for an advanced class.
Well, I mean, the cognitive processes are really important for both groups. Astro 101ers. Mentioned a guy called Bill Brewer thinking about how do kids think about distance in space. And what are the cognitive processes that they go through in order to get some sort of mental representation of how big it is? Yeah.
Processes feed into the attitudes.
Well, they could. They could. I mean, it's one of these false dichotomies again, I think.
Cognitive processes.
Attitudes and motivation and self-efficacy.
Career intentions.
Including career intentions. And is there a difference? I mean, is there a male-female difference as well? Cognitive processing. Oh, it's too difficult. I can't think about how big space is a common female complaint. Teenage female complaint. So how are you going? You want us in defining the terms?
Student attitudes in science?
Well, the second half is one research domain. But in the 90s and noughties, researchers were investigating how kids try and conceptualize the big things in astronomy, like the distance between the Earth and the Moon.
Okay, so the first 5 minutes are up. So now it's time to form into your bigger
Between
group
stars.
to decide on what you're reporting back.
That's a series of cognitive mental models that have to be built up. And there was a lot of research in that domain. Are they more important to understand how the kids do that? Or are we more concerned about how kids feel about astronomy? How they feel about doing
Okay, reminder to form into your big
i.e.
pod
their
groups,
attitudes,
area
their
groups.
self-efficacy, how good they feel about themselves doing astronomy, and what they want to do in the future. Well, I mean, kids, this is really our question as researchers in the domain. Should our research into these domains be dominated by any one of those three domains up there? These attitudinal type things.
And they need to fail a test or two. There's lots of studies that were done in the 90s.
What's at the bottom?
Oh, yeah. That's why I tried to put that thing at the start.
You want to get the blood on the ground?
Knowledge is down here, right? Knowledge is down here. It's just memorization.
They're having.
Knowledge is something you have to have.
Excuse me, can I squeeze past? Ah. He doesn't believe us.
But I don't believe, I believe under certain circumstances.
Got about 40 seconds before we. I'm going to jump in real quick. 20 seconds till we report out. Okay. So let's gather ourselves together and get ready to report back. If anyone wants to volunteer to go first, that would be nice. Oh, this group down here? What?
Okay, I hear some exciting conversations still happening, but we we kind of circled around, starting with maybe self-efficacy and attitudes are really important for us to understand now, but then that the metacognitive skills are important for us to understand, and then for our students to understand in order for them to become more self-efficacious. An interesting point that came up was maybe we still need more research and understanding of how cultural differences impact learning of content knowledge, and the cognitive processes, how they're impacted by cultural differences. And gosh, I think that's all I can say.
That whole piece weaves into then upping your sense of, yes, I can, yes, I belong, and I want to.
Okay, next group. You guys ready? Okay, so is this even on? I don't think this is. Oh, this is on. We object. There, some of us felt that the question was partly posed. Some of us felt that the question presumed knowledge of the history of the field of astronomical research, astronomical education research about these categories as well. I personally felt that it's not possible to completely decouple talking about context knowledge and reasoning processes from all the other fields that are touched about this. So we were really uncertain as to do this. And if please back me up. Thumbs up. Do you guys agree that this? Okay. All right. Okay. So we're so sorry. We have nothing else to give. conscientious objectors down there? Okay.
Okay, so we were also on like, are we sure that, yeah, it did, we thought it assumed maybe a little bit more knowledge, but we kind of like, do we really have to choose, especially if we're using mixed methodologies on our teaching methods? Do we, you know, what sort of things do we really want to talk about? We were thinking a little bit about if you have, what what would we want to research if we put it into grant proposals, like to get funding and stuff? So what would we want to put, what sort of measures would we want to put in there? We were also talking about, is this the last science course? And it's not that we don't want them to take more STEM courses, is we want them to realize that maybe they do want to take more STEM courses. And so that could be part of the attitudes and self-efficacy. And are you trying to measure learning gains? Are you measuring learning gains in contents, or are you doing it with attitude, self-efficacy, career intention, kind of things? And then, are you institution dependent? Do you have like just seniors in your class who want to get out?
Great. Thank you. Okay, this way.
All right, so we were conflicted by the question too, so we decided to go off on a tangent and blamed it on Clay. So, but we will say this, that we thought it was mentioned that attitudes and self-efficacy probably have a higher importance if you have a future in the area. Like your attitude, like, are you going to take future STEM classes, future astronomy, stuff like that? The attitude and self-efficacy probably has more important. The other thing is knowledge. If you look at Bloom's taxonomy, that's the beginning. That's the bottom of the pyramid. It's like you have to have knowledge before you do anything else. And it was said, like, assume they have zero knowledge of astronomy, and assume that many are coming in with thinking astronomy is astrology. So just assume nothing, you know. And so so you've got to have some knowledge in there before you can build attitudes or self-efficacy or anything. So you can't be without.
Okay. Yep.
We also object. So my first instinct, and I did education research after my undergrad, self-efficacy, attitudes, and even content retention or content knowledge is a cognitive process. And then one of my other teammates here brought up a great point. The elements of this question, all of them will change because people learn differently. So I guess in that way, cognitive processes is the most important because you can match that change if you understand cognitive processes. Does that make sense to all of y'all? Okay.
We also answered yes, and that self-efficacy should be grounded in reality, so that when you come in overconfident, you realize maybe you're not as good. When you come in underconfident, you learn that you're actually good at it, and then choose to do it.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So perhaps the panelists might want to, if they have any comments.
Bang, bang. There's actually a history in that question. A lot of the stuff done in the 90s, a little bit before, and in the noughties, focused on content knowledge and cognitive processes. So Bill Brewer, a famous educational researcher here in the US, was really interested in kids' conceptualization of distance in the universe. He started off with the moon, and he could represent that through a thing called a content representation, with the moon as a basketball inflated to the correct pressure to be exactly the right size of 24 centimeters in diameter, and a tennis ball 6.1 centimeters in diameter. Competition tennis ball, they're very, very close to the right size of the moon and the earth. How far apart should they be? And he started off by asking kids, how far apart? Here's the basketball, here's the tennis ball. And he found that their representation was totally off beam. They held the basketball in one hand and they had the tennis ball in the other hand. and most of them held them about 60 to 70 centimeters apart. Yeah. Even Aristotle got it right. He said 30 Earth diameters is the distance to the moon. And when you measure that out, it's 7 meters 20, and it gobsmacks the kids. So there's a whole lot of research in these representations in kids. Then we started to get interested in the attitude, self-efficacy, and now career intentions. So it's an evolutionary question that's really built on an understanding of the history. But you need to know, from my perspective, what those cognitive processes are that kids go through in order to build their self-efficacy, feel confident about their knowledge, perhaps influence their attitudes, although that's an argument that Danitudes through Dan Reichert and we as the research team are still having, and perhaps then influence their career intentions because they feel good about their performance in a particular domain, like astronomy. So that's my perspective.
Thanks. I would also like to echo that perspective. It should be a yes, all of the above, and kind of response. One of the things that I'd also selfishly like to see included in this question for future research, and we're going to get to this a little bit later today, hopefully, is also instructional decisions and teachers' pedagogical instruction, and how those methods, which vary widely from the 900-seat student astronomy class to the 25-seat student astronomy class, and what techniques will reveal the best increased content knowledge and student learning outcomes, as well as attitudes, self-efficacy, and career intention. So I'd like to sneak the pedagogy part in there too.
All right, well, I suppose I'm obligated to give my opinion as well. So, yes, of course, they're both important. It's not a zero-sum game. I agree with all those comments that have been made. I'll just throw out one point for everybody to think about, which is, so of course, I absolutely care whether or not my students actually learn some content, right? I want to have good attitudes, but I also want to learn some content. And when we are assessing our students, right, our assessments are how we communicate to our students what we value. And so if we come in and say, the thing I value most is your attitudes and self-efficacy, and that's great, but then if the assessments are focused on content, then we are giving mixed messages to our students because the thing we're using to assess them does not match what we said our ultimate goals were. And I know there are people in here that have been thinking very deeply about these issues, and so I'm sure we will hear more about that as the conversations unfold.
Okay, thanks. So before I trigger a mutiny and everyone runs out, because I would like to kind of, before we start on this question, maybe kind of focus it down. So most of you are practitioners and teachers and don't have a history in your head of astronomy education research. And so perhaps from your perspective as teachers, so what research would you like to see? Like, we've either researched it and we've poorly communicated it, which is one thing, and then you won't know about it, or we haven't researched it and you won't know about it. So from the perspective of being a teacher, perhaps what research would you like to have communicated to you? And then all 7.5 astronomy education researchers in the world can get together and communicate it better. Does that sound like a kind of more focused perspective? Yes? Okay, let's do it from that perspective. Right.
Enrique, have you got that question? Have you got that question? It's different. blood is on the floor down there. The educator is saying. To the astronomy. Which is true. There's no research on instructors with one of the comments. In other words, I haven't seen any research in the instructors because I haven't bloody looked.
Okay, time to form up into your larger groups.
So this is the kind of thing then, right? We want to know the data, the strategies.
Okay. We've got a lot of practice of what to do next. It's time to do it again.
So just read, turn it on or not.
Who do you think should go first? Who do you think should go first? Yeah. That one.
Yeah.
Start with B and work your way around.
Okay. I just want to go around this way.
Okay, so we're gonna share out our ideas here. Our first response was none of the above, but we came back to all of the above. Building relationships between researchers and practitioners. So having a pipeline of information transfer. We do all this research, we need to get it back to the practitioners, but it has to be a constantly repeating iterative process forever because the students are changing. So we're gonna always have to change our understanding of how they learn, what they know, and adapt our pedagogical approaches to those new things. And there are constraints for the instructors that the researchers have to understand. And I think that's it. Did I summarize it? Oh, and good techniques will benefit all the students. We kind of went, good research techniques and good teaching techniques. It will all benefit all the students at all the levels. Okay, I think I summarized it.
Thank you. Okay, now for this group. There's War and Peace on a whiteboard.
Yeah, our War and Peace. We actually talked about sort of two separate levels, things about, I think for the older students, and in terms of, we want to know about our students who are incoming, but we really need things that we know will also work with our students. We want the research on what is effective for different types of students and different types of situations. And then on the other side of the room, we were talking about more research on how we don't lose girls as they become preteens. And this also relates, I'm sure, to other underrepresented folks, because we still are. And talking about, a lot of it is support in groups at those age levels. But I don't know what all the research is, and apparently there's lots out there, but it's still happening. What else on here? Well, thank you. Thank you for changing the sound. That was not painful. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
We talked more about kind of where the holes are in the research. That one of the things we talked last year at the AAPT meeting and in the optics group, the two-year college group, is that there's almost no research that includes two-year colleges. That it's almost always left out, and that it's very much an ignored group and what role they play in what's going on. We also talked about how the categories are studied mostly in isolation, and how it needs to be more of a continuum, what happens going from the elementary school to the high school to the colleges, or even to the two-year colleges, to the graduate studies. And kind of assessment methods, how do the assessment methods fix it? When you're teaching to the AP test, are they really teaching? And in the high schools, how can we help the high school teachers? Are the universities teaching the high school teachers? Are we helping them? What are their assessments like? And they're kind of forced in what they teach to the national standards and the high school standards, things like that.
Perfect timing. Couldn't see you for the pillar.
All right. So one of the first things that we noticed about this question was that the instructors were split between undergraduate and K through 12 level. And we would like to, we don't know if this is very highly researched, but we'd like to see more research focusing on students in the K through 12 level, especially us who teach undergrad. We want to see the research on how these students are retaining their math skills. And secondly, in terms of undergraduate instructor research on that, we were talking about the idea of how different teaching techniques work in different teaching environments, different college environments. For example, you have your large colleges, you have small liberal arts colleges, you have community colleges. Do different techniques work in different environments? That's something that we weren't sure has been researched, and we'd like to see more of that. So we tended to lean more towards preferring wanting to see more research for instructors.
Getting lots of practice. So always ending on time. 60 seconds each.
Alrighty, so we had some agreement on this collectively, which is good, which is our main target for research would be school level teachers. And the reason why is because of some of the things we see, and being told here today, like students not knowing that right angle is 90 degrees kind of thing, and that was supposed to be taught in the 4th grade. How did they lose that knowledge? You may have all seen the TV show, Are You Smarter Than a 5th Grader? So I understand there's some things that, we're going to forget, but we have things we don't want them to forget. We want them to come in. So we have freshmen coming in with all kinds of stuff that we have to reteach. The idea is they have 13 years, K through 12, of being taught stuff, and then we have 4 years to correct or reteach them that. We don't want to correct or reteach. We'd like them to get it right the first time. So let's do some research on school level teaching, teachers, to see what we can do to help them. And with their, in particular, it was suggested through like continuing education, which some of us have done, where we go into the high schools and junior highs and continue to help those. Because real quickly, as an example, 90% of all high school physics classes are being taught by someone that does not even have a minor in physics. So.
Thank you. And okay, so last group on this question.
Well, okay, let's see. We were looking at this question and thinking, well, why does this question even matter if this research is not being taken seriously by the astronomy community, who it's supposed to be helping and infusing? So, yeah, let's see, I lost my train of thought there. But it's basically about, we're doing all this education research, but it needs to be like disseminated. Teaching ed faculty who are involved, with research, they need to be on the colloquium committees. They need to be involved with the Centers for Teaching and Learning and faculty development. So there has to be some sort of closing the loop going on. And there were also comments like, all these results that come, those are good teaching techniques, and people say they adopt it in their teaching, but then and they put it in their annual evaluation and for tenure and whatever, but no one actually closes the loop and checks, are they actually implementing it? How well is it working for them? It's just about checking the boxes. Okay, one more thing, there should be a cross-link between ADS and ERIC.
Good job.
Great, thank you very much. Do any of the panelists like to comment?
Thanks. All right, those are fantastic comments. I want to circle back to some things that Group C and D mentioned. One of the comments was that, yes, we need to start early in elementary school because we know by 4th grade, many students decide STEM or not STEM. By 8th grade, that's pretty much solidified. So we definitely need to do some more research with elementary and middle school level teachers. And in fact, someone mentioned that they have 12 or 13 years of science. They do not have that 12 or 13 years of science education, thanks to No Child Left Behind, also known as Every Child Left Behind. Did I say that out loud? I'm so sorry. What that did was decimated science education in elementary levels. And so nationally, we're seeing about 1 hour of science instruction in elementary if we're lucky. In Winston-Salem, North Carolina, students get about 20 minutes of science every other Friday. What are we supposed to do with that? And that is despite the fact that Earth and space sciences are throughout the next generation science standards, which again, we haven't adopted yet in the state either, but that's a separate conversation. The other conversation is teacher certification that someone else mentioned, and there are some states that are now going to only core science teaching certifications. You just take a few classes in every subject, and that makes it easier for your administrator to put you in a certain, in whatever science class they need. So if you want to have a longer conversation, I'll be happy to later about all of those things. I'm sorry, this is definitely something that we need to talk about. And finally, I would encourage higher ed folks to talk to their high school teachers and middle and elementary school teachers and ask them what they need. That would be a fantastic research project. What do you need? Maybe I can help you find it because we have lots of amazing resources that teachers just don't have time in their day to shop for, and we can point them to the amazing resources. Or we can help figure out what they need because if you're teaching physics and astronomy, it would be nice to have well-prepared students in your classes. So I think we need to do a better job of bridging that gap between K-12 and higher education and all of us being at the same table and fighting the good fight. So sorry if that was long-winded. Yes.
Just related to this kind of topic, I've been reading a lot recently about the impact that COVID had on certain, like especially math, but other subjects as well. So I think we've all been talking a little bit more about like broader trends in preparedness and things, but I'm wondering if anybody knows of research or anything that we know we can do about this kind of extremely precipitous gap that was created by COVID and apparently has not recovered for those students.
I'll try and answer that question, and my answer is going to be kind of a poor answer in that you know, there are certainly people that have been looking at this, but you know, research takes time, and as that time is going on, the students are moving through our educational system, and so we're kind of stuck here. We know our students are coming in with some gaps, and this isn't research. My colleagues, I think, put it very nicely. Every year where that gap is in their knowledge has moved back a year, right? It started off, you know, the first time they came back from the pandemic, maybe it was kind of the upper high school math that they were kind of weak on. And then the year later is maybe the lower high school math. And the year after that, it was that kind of middle school level math. So if I'm going to be pessimistic here, it might be by the time you have firm research answers about that, these populations will have already moved through the classroom. So maybe it's at a point where we don't need to wait for the research. We should be thinking as a community, what should we be doing, you know, in the meantime? Because we've all of us that are in the classroom probably have a sense of what is and is not working for this current cohort of students.
And finally, I think we should continue to investigate all three populations up there because they're all changing with time, as just been alluded to by Colin. The society is changing. The students are changing. We change. We get older. There's one really important point made by an educator in the recalcitrant group down here. And that point made by the educator is that we should all be researching our own teaching, our own students, all the time. That form of research is highly individual, and it's called action research. Thank you very much. And action research is cyclical. The first time you do it, you make lots of mistakes. Example, in 2005, I got primary teacher education, pre-service primary teacher education, and we recast the subject to be one topic. That was astronomy. There was no way we could teach 6 content areas in one semester. So we decided to go really deep, and we made it mastery level. So they needed to know the content. We focused on the teaching of the content. But my God, our assessment marking went through the roof. So in the next cycle, we decided to attack that aspect of things. We still focused on the content, but we allowed them only one resubmission to make mastery, and we set mastery at 80%. But then the content level went way down. Instead of a 2 sigma gain in their content knowledge, it dropped back to 1 sigma. And we thought, what the hell happened? And we realized that they were choosing the really easy projects and neglecting the hard projects in their investigations. So then we said, well, in the pre-test, if you get anything wrong, you've got to investigate that. And the results went to 6 sigma improvement. 6 sigma. So the action research component illustrated in those 3 little sessions in our early days then stabilized to 4 sigma thereafter. And we kept on making changes to the collaborative learning that was happening within the group, focusing on their interactions with each other while they investigated the various components of the primary astronomy content that they were supposed to have. So we're each our own researchers. And in order to make a frame for yourself, you need to go and look at the research. That's where Michael's paper with the 2,000 plus articles is going to be a very, very useful first resource to go and have a look at.
Can I jump in here and just say 2 things? One, I want to build off of that, and I just want to say, imagine when you're teaching, your assessments could be exams, could be something else other than an exam, right? Exams and assessments are not necessarily synonyms, right? Imagine if your assessments are the equivalent of your telescope time, right? You wouldn't show up at a telescope without a plan of what you want to observe and what you're hoping to learn. Imagine approaching your assessments about like that the same way. I'm going to go in and assess students with a plan of what I want to learn about their understanding, and that will inform what will then happen in my class later this semester or in future terms, ... The other thing I want to, I'm just curious about, I have no idea what's going to happen here. This is a room full of people that care deeply about astronomy and astronomy education, right? That's why you're here. And yet I've heard, in our discussions, comments about, wanting to know where stuff is in the research literature. Just out of curiosity right now, if I told everybody, go find papers in astronomy education research, how many would know exactly what journals or what repositories to look at right now? Just raise your hands. Okay. Okay. Great. Awesome. Yeah, no, that was just for me. I was just curious. Like this, you are a group of people that care, and not every hand was up. That tells us something about how good our community has done communicating that. Thank you.
Great. I had some comments, but we're running out a little bit out of time, so I'm going to just jump into the next one. And retaining the same framing from the start of number 2, from that there might be research and you might not know about it. Does the research support the claim that astronomy is a gateway science? That sounds like a question you'd ask an astronomy education researcher, and I could answer. But does anyone have a problem with this question and how it's framed? Just initially. Fun? I don't know the answer. It's a bit more complicated than that. But
Well, Salampur 2022 or 23 frames the question and does research on 57 countries in the way in which astronomy is integrated into their various curricula. And he doesn't have an answer. Well, you have the knowledge in the astronomy domain, and if you think about all of the skills that you need your students to have in order to interact successfully with your subject, then you might say, well, there's engineering, there's technology, we're getting them to use computers for data processing. There's certainly mathematics. There's not only astronomy as a science, there's physics. There's certainly astrobiology, which is entering the domain. And in the conversations, we've heard many people talk about astrobiology in passing as a new domain in the Astro 101 course. So would you like to see your subject as the gateway science and really promote it in your university, saying, look, everybody should be doing astronomy. So you've got no longer one person in your college doing it, but teaching it, you've got a staff of 4 or 5 or 6. So Darryl, for example, from Saskatoon, has about 1,200 students, and he's doing most of the teaching himself. How ridiculous is that? When all of these students are evaporating into other courses.
Can I address the question just really quickly? Because I've actually been looking for this research in the research that I do for the past 6 months to support this claim. And yes, there isn't really research that supports it yet. There's decades of anecdotal evidence. But I have been looking, just a very clear answer, I've been looking for this research and can't really find it. No. Yeah, it's just not collected anywhere.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Well,
so you found a paper, you said? But that doesn't answer the question. That's the solemn question, paper.
Okay, so maybe we'll trust Rachel Freed, astronomy education researcher extraordinaire, for that answer. So do people want to see what the next question is and maybe address that?
Sorry.
How
I
would
think
we?
we could use, we could answer this question by saying what kind of study we would find persuasive or not to answer this question, right? Like she pointed out, how would you design a study to answer this question? You'd have to maybe start by defining astronomy, defining gateway science, and then, that's what we all know how to do, right? Like ask science questions. And how, how would we answer it if we were trying to? I don't know. We could also skip to the next
No, no,
question.
that's okay.
I don't mean
So-
to.
I love this question.
So do I. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, okay, so hands up, who votes to play that reframing of the question?
I just had a fact to throw in. This isn't a research study, but it is done by the American Institute of Physics. And I was looking at this data this morning in terms of the number of astronomy majors. If we're just treating as astronomy as a gateway to other STEM, the research in terms of how many majors there are
we can look at that and then say, of those, how many are actually going into being astronomers and how many are going into other STEM? And like, that's a number. Like, those numbers exist in the AIP database right now. And so it's just a matter of dividing those to figure out, is it a gateway? And if anything, the increase in astronomy majors, which almost looked exponential, it only went up to about like 2020 or 2018, but it's ramping up, suggests that we could just, you don't need to do a study. You can take the AIP data and prove that probably in about an hour.
Thanks for volunteering, Anthony.
So one thing that I think about with this question that's important to identify, like we could find the data that says astronomy is a gateway science, but is it because it really is or because of saturation? So like in the science center field, we've all agreed your biggest hitters are space, dinosaurs, and rocks. That's what science centers focus a lot of their attention on. So is it that gets people to STEM, or is it just because that's what's available to them?
Maybe. Okay.
One way that we could study or structure such a study is to look at students who take intro to astronomy, how many of those switch majors into STEM versus students who take a biology course or a chemistry course.
And is astronomy a terminal science, which also might be interesting to look at too with that data set? And what does that mean for our instructional decisions?
I agree with what Diana said, and I think I just wanted, with the point of looking at the AIP data, I'm not sure that would get at the entire question because that doesn't address the intro astronomy classes of non-majors, right? That would be a subsection of, that would answer part of the question maybe of like the astronomy majors, but that's a different question of those who take the intro course without the intention of being astronomers, which I think is the bigger subsection.
Okay. Do we want to?
How many people take introductory astronomy as like freshmen versus how many of them take them as a senior? Because I know like a lot of students in my class are juniors or seniors.
Okay. So I'm sort of in the middle of what do we want to do here? We start sort of just.
So just in the interest of anecdotal data, I got into physics because of astronomy, but I never took an Astro 101 course because I started learning about astronomy in grade school. And that made me want to do physics to understand astronomy better. So the kind of studies you're all talking about would miss me.
Yeah.
All right. I've got my marching orders. Next question. Should we be broadening our horizons beyond Astro 101 as the focus? Is it too late? Or should we push to years levels beyond Astro 101? Okay, so let's get into our groups and have a discussion for 5 minutes. Yeah, should we focus our attention of our research on Astro 101 students as the population? Or is that too late to capture students, or is like where should we focus our efforts, I guess, on a research as a research field? Yes. Yeah. So Astro 102, 201, higher level undergrad. Yes. It's an Australianism. Well, there's very small differences in language.
Well, if it's no, then you have a chat.
Session. Very interesting. Varying opinions. Good to, it's a rich discussion here. I think this is the richest discussion.
I can't tell from the inside. I'm probably in the middle worrying about it.
Or maybe it's like a bias because it's the one that I'm most interested in. But you know, but I do think there's a lot of it's making people stop fascinating.
Yes.
More so than the others.
Yeah, we rephrase the entire question.
That too.
Well, what I've got from this is that we don't communicate the research.
No. And we don't talk across levels or across departments, and we need to do more of that.
So there's not many of us who do that, and we're always doing something else as well. Okay, time to form up into your larger groups.
Don't have the answer, but it's
Okay, time to take turns to summarize our sections. I'm going to stop picking on the table down there and come to one of the middle tables.
Almost. All right.
Okay. Attention.
So our group thought that really, if you are going to have people who are going to be engaged in science, we really have to get them in early. So in middle school and elementary school, and be able to have them have that experience. But as was brought up, most states are taking that away. And so waiting till Astro 101 in our minds was mostly too late for almost everybody. There's might be a few here now and then, but if you're going to capture people and put them into a STEM, you really have to capture because they love astronomy when they're young. I'm also the planetarium director, so I know they come in so enthusiastic. Then we get the high school kids coming into the planetarium, and they're not so enthusiastic. And there's a few you could tell who just kept up that, love for astronomy. So it's somewhere, obviously, the studies have shown, it disappears somewhere in middle school. And so we're not sure how to solve a problem where, states are basically taken away from science so early on.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'm going to head up the table up here.
Okay, Jonathan says we want you study what we teach. So does that too? Study what we teach. Yes. So I think we felt a similar thing that Astro 101 is students who largely have made up their minds or feel like their options have narrowed already. So we are, as usual, the answer is yes. Yes, it would be lovely to know what methods work well for Astro 101 students, or are we interested in it as a gateway? In that case, maybe our focus should be what can we do, what interventions can we do in K through 12? That feels like the sweet spot for that.
I did that program with Louisa, and one of them is doing biochem PhD now. And she's one of the students who went with me is doing a biochem PhD now because of the science she learned in that. She's like, hey, I can do science. The NITARP program, the one Louisa does, it's NASA, infrared, Yes, and it's really good. So if you know high school teachers, you should tell them about it because it is actually a gateway into STEM, even though she chose biochem.
Okay, next group.
Yeah, so we also agreed that Astro 101 was likely too late and that something in the middle school time period is really important for bringing that excitement and interest into the high school years, and also noting that at the high school level, sophomores, juniors, seniors in high school have considerably more opportunities to take part in things like SSP, like summer camps, places where they can learn and engage deeper with research and astronomy. And so if you can get past that gap from middle school to that point, those kinds of options are much greater. And so that could be a good thing. The other thing we discussed is that another problem with Astro 101 is that institutions place their Astro 101 courses in different contexts. So I know that where I went to undergrad, if you had even an inkling of interest in potentially being an astro major, you were advised not to take Astro 101 because you wouldn't have room in your schedule if you actually ended up putting together a STEM, path. And so it would be a bad thing to study that class to discover if it was a gateway to astro, because those students were advised away from it.
So we actually had some people echoing that very same sentiment, that the people who wanted to study astrophysics were tracked toward a different intro astro course. But we were like, oh yeah, the backwards especially would be super interesting. But we then thought about like if you're going for Astro 101, which is maybe too late, but if it's a gateway, then you're going to have to do longitudinal tracking of people, which is very expensive in research and very time consuming. But we do also have to complete the cycle of getting people who are teaching science stuff in the middle schools and in everything else. So we need to study some of these higher level courses that these students, that people will take who are going to end up being teachers, because a lot of times they ended up being really lectury, and so you're not teaching people with the best practices if they're going to be teachers.
So one idea that I have is if we want to do an Astro 101 research, we might want to do it at a 2-year institution, because that's where we can get them. We can track which path they want to take afterwards. And most of them are going into a 4-year institution, so we can see if their major changed. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we had some of the same conversation, and it really was, the answer was sort of, for us, depends on too late for what. I think if we're talking about developing scientifically literate people, it's not too late ever. And again, STEM majors versus non-STEM majors, it's going to be sort of different levels where you're doing that research. So at the younger levels, if you want to know if you're going to change their career intentions, we got to start younger in that research.
Okay, last group for the session.
We also mirrored what was shared amongst the other groups. Somebody in our group noticed, as being a teacher in high school, that high school students were advised not to participate in any course that teaches astronomy, because only the kids that are serious about science will take chemistry and biology and all that stuff. So I also wanted to share that somebody in our group mentioned that people are dropping out of STEM at all stages, like junior high, high school, undergrad, et cetera. And so there's different issues at every level. I did some research this morning on what matters for the K-12 realm in terms of keeping people in STEM, or why they choose to persist in STEM. So actually, science talk at home doesn't matter. As long as it's an acceptable career at home, it matters. And then representation and discussion of diversity in scientists in the classroom matters.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Do any of our panelists have a comment?
I'll just say real quick, I interpreted this question a little bit different. So I love the directions people took it here. I look at this question being like, we do a lot of astronomy education research at the Astro 101 level. What if we did it at like the majors level, right? We have astronomy majors at a lot of our institutions. If we go over and talk to our physics education research colleagues, there's a lot of PER research on what happens at the upper division level. The same isn't true for astronomy education research. And part of the issue is, unlike physics, there's no set canon for what an astronomy major looks like. But I'll just leave it there.
I think there's a pretty broad agreement that we need to go beyond just Astro 101, although one group up the back corner here said, study what we do. I think that's really important. We need to get insights on the best practices in Astro 101 and publicize those sorts of approaches. I'll finish with one very short anecdote. Michael and I met a year 10 student in 2010 when we had done a whole load of work on the equivalent of Astro 101, developing color magnitude diagrams. Now that kid had already chosen her specialization in year 11 and 12, and it was Japanese and music. She was very, very good at both. She changed over the Christmas holidays to maths and physics. So you can have a major impact if we do it earlier in the process as well. And by the way, she was female as well.
Okay. Well, congratulations. We made it to the end of the sixth set of dangerous questions. So let's give ourselves a congratulation.
All right, everyone, get up, stretch your legs, take a